So I want to thank you all for coming on a beautiful snowy day to our professor, honor professor lecture series. So a professor is an academic term. Someone with high status is called professor, somebody who's a good mentor, a good teacher. And so we're very lucky today to have Professor Brave Rock with us. On his bio, he instructs us that he's a member of the Blackfeet Blood Tribe from Alberta, Canada. He currently is the Field Education Director in a social work program. He is also a graduate of Salish Kootenai College and has a master's degree in social work from Eastern Washington University. And his lecture today, when I was looking at the abstract, this is a very mysterious lecture on culture. And so I am always excited to learn about culture. And so we are very fortunate to have Professor Brave Rock here. Virgil is also a singer, a colleague, and a good friend. So with that, welcome Professor Brave Rock.
Thank you, Luana. Now we walking around quite a bit, and I can't stand still. When I'm nervous, I'm worse. I tell my students, don't sit right in front of me, I'll be kicking and spitting on you. One of the things that, before I get started here, is basically introduce who I am. Like Luana had said in my bio, I am from the Blood tribe. My dad is from the Bloods in Alberta, and my mom is Blackfeet. And as a tribal member from both tribes, I've learned the distinction of the difference of those tribes. And one of the things that I often run across students is they identify themselves as, now I'll just kind of give a little bit of history of the structures of those tribes. In Montana is the Blackfeet tribe. In Alberta, just across the border, is the Blood tribe. Further northwest is the Piegan tribe. In northern Alberta by Calgary is the Blackfoot tribe. Now, in our language, we identify those tribes through name. The Blackfeet tribe in Brown and their Beak-Gunny. My tribe, the Blood, were Kainai. The tribe northwest, which are Piegan, they're called Iskapa Beak-Gunny. And the Blackfoot tribe, they're known as Sitsica. So those are our traditional names, that how we identify ourselves. And when you talk to a tribal member there, we refer to ourselves as a cohort. We call ourselves Treaty 7 or the Blackfoot Confederacy. So when people say, when someone comes to me, now I will be straight up with you. I do a lot of farm talk, okay? I come from a ranch. I was raised to talk hard. And that's the way I am. So if I say words that offend you, I'm sorry, and I'll apologize up front with you, okay? But often when I have people run up to me and say, or meet me and say, I'm Blackfoot, I wonder sometimes if they really know what tribe they're talking about. So I tell them, so you're Blackfoot from Alberta? No, I'm from Montana. So you're Blackfeet? No, I'm Blackfoot. So I try to bring that distinction as to what tribes that they're talking about. But it's not to offend them or correct them, it's just trying to teach them that there are distinctions in what tribes that we're from. So when you talk about Blackfeet student here, they'll identify themselves as Blackfeet. And it's a very much of an identification of that tribe that they come from. Or Blood, we will identify ourselves as Kainai, which in the English language means many chiefs. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and start my presentation here. Presently, there are approximately 562 federally recognized tribes, and numerous other tribal affiliations are recognized by the individual states throughout the United States here. An area of concern is the lack of younger tribal members not seeking out tribal elders to learn the culture, value, and traditions. The preservation and transmission of intergenerational knowledge is critical to the survival of the Native American culture. Traditional languages, values, norms of the tribes are facing a critical tipping point. If there are not steps taken by the Native American communities to change the progression of the youth from the cultural to the non-cultural perspectives, many tribes will begin to lose their cultural identities. Native students, having been initially raised in a distinctive culture of their own, are often thrust into an educational system that promotes the values of the majority culture, not those of their own. If the resulting class of culture continues, the student may be forced to choose one culture at the expense of the other. A tragic paradox emerges. Success in school becomes failure on the reservation, and failure becomes success. One of the concerns that I have is that for many Native American children or students that leave the reservation, for many of them, this is the very first time they've ventured off the reservation. They come into the educational system and they are challenged. They are challenged in many formats as far as their language, their norms, their beliefs, or the lack of them in the communities that they move to. They move into areas that they're unfamiliar with, and that sometimes not accepted for those beliefs and norms that they have. When a Native American enters a room, many assumptions and possible stereotypes are labeled to that individual. Possible assumptions that may come from a reservation. Do they come from a reservation? Or they have full knowledge of their cultures, values, rituals, and histories of their particular tribe. Through Indian cultures, within Indian cultures, a look at the progression of the Native American people from the cultural, the bicultural, and non-cultural perspectives and their characteristics. The progression to which I refer to is the degree in which the assimilation process has affected the individual, their families, and communities. The best analogy that I have of the culture of a cultural Indian, the analogy or comparison I have is I used to describe this group as they are born, they are bred first, and born, and they will die on the reservations. Individuals from this group are very seldom venture off the reservation for long periods of time. All the resources they require, they find in the confines and boundaries of the reservation. The following are 13 characteristic traits of a culturally based American Indian. 1, uses nature without losing his or her reverence for the environment. Constant awareness of the Creator, spirituality, and acts on it at any time. When they cut down a tree, when they kill an animal, when they catch a fish, or they do anything that brings harm to nature, they offer tobacco in its place. Praying for that, whatever that creature is or whatever it is, to have others replace it. And praying for that creature's journey on the other side. Second, is they are resistant and slow to change. Change, the Native American people have seen change through their history. They've seen what change has brought. And so they sit down and they think before they make a decision. They're not fast because they realize they have children in the future that are going to be affected by their decisions. Structured time has very little value. Concentration on the here and now. There's a term that's been used out there for many, many years called Indian time. Indian time over time has been seen as a negative in reference to Indian people, and often thought of as I can sleep in as long as I want, be late as long as any time. I'm running on Indian time. I asked an elder years and years ago, what does Indian time mean? And he said, you're standing in it. He said, Indian time is right now. In Indian time, there's no guarantee of tomorrow. Yesterday's gone. For none of us, there's a guarantee that we're going to have that big steak we're planning on tonight. There's no guarantee of the next minute. It's not written anywhere. No one can guarantee you those hours. What you have is right here. Indian time is when you don't take for granted time, but you appreciate every second that you receive given to you by the Creator. You don't plan to plan, let's get all together and let's all have a barbecue next weekend, because we may not all make it there. So this is when I talked to this elder. He said, Indian time is right now, you live it. Too many of us take advantage of time. And we take advantage of everything that we have in our lives at this second, this moment, including our children, our grandchildren, and our families, in our homes. We take for granted those things. This is what an elder had told me about Indian time. Depending on the tribal acculturation, the level of male and female equality is culturally determined. Also, if a tribe is paternalistic or maternalistic. A cultural native they are family and community oriented. Family and community helping in ceremonies and events. Family and community involvement. We get ahead for the group, family, or clan, or society. We are taught as children that what you do, your decisions, are also going to reflect upon your parents. We're often told when we're children, or we hear it even as adults, when you see a child running around being disrespectful, in the community, among our people, we say one whose child that is. Because it goes back to their parents. What have they taught them about respect? It reflects back on us as parents and as people. What have we taught our children about values and culture? So we are very much identified as to who we are in our role in the communities. Action and work orientated. Family and culture and ceremony and events are priority. I'll just put an example in this community with the Salish and Kootenai and Ponderay, is the jump dances are very much respected. Your involvement as family, those are priority to be there. Sundance ceremonies, it's very important that you all be there and participate in those ceremonies. That you don't just show up and there's a good movie shown in town, you don't take off to that or you'll be scolded and reminded until you don't do it again. And it might be your grandma doing that, and you don't want to get your grandma mad. Informality and conformity with the group, facing hardships together, embarrassing or adverse incidents without showing emotion. As men, Native American men, many of us are taught to be what I would refer to as being stoic. How many of you seen stoic Indians? They're easy to identify. I often see them. They stand there with their arms folded, normally wearing boots and cowboy hats, even if they don't have a horse. And they have this look on their face like, do not talk to me. And they show no emotion. And what's unfortunate about that, in a sense, is that neither do they share emotion. And some of that comes from historical traumas, through what we or our parents and grandparents have experienced through boarding school, and through the loss of that norm or that culture of sharing those feelings. We've lost that. So in one sense, it's a way of showing our native culture. But also in a community, an event like that, or a situation like that, it keeps us strong as a family. When we're able to stay together, hold together as a family when situations occur. And give that support to each other because we realize that we are and who we are in a community of a closed reservations. That our actions many times are reflected on who we are in the communities. Family and community orientated. Do for all. That what you do in the community as far as ceremony or getting up and performing for a drum group or whatnot, you do for your community. You do for your families. You don't do it for yourself. And many times we have to go through protocol And that's sometimes through our parents and grandparents or through the elders asking, what do we need to do? And getting that cultural advice. And lastly, the 13th one is the share world possessions with all those in need. Now what that refers to, now this might be maybe best comparison is to our grandparents or even myself. I find myself in that situation. Is that many times you'll see elders having very few things in their homes. It may be even the last money that they have of their pension money. The last $20 in grandma's purse. Or the last $5 that grandpa put away, and he's going to give it to you. He's not going to ask, or she's not going to ask, or she's going to go in her house and she's going to fill up all her bag with groceries and give it to you. And even though she may not have enough in her cupboards to feed herself, she'll give it to you. She won't ask for, when are you going to give this back to me? But she'll give it to you. There's no question when it's going to be replaced. Or if you can replace it, there'll be no question. And so you wonder, how do we stop this? Can't. It's a cultural thing. Many, I guess, children have tried to stop their parents from giving, our grandparents from giving that stuff away, and they can't. It's just the way it is. And I'm getting caught up here. The next section I want to talk to you about is the bicultural. The bicultural. I guess the best way to describe the bicultural is one who has the ability to leave the comforts of the reservation life and move into urban areas and survive. These families have adapted to the expectation and norms of the urban life. They become time-oriented. They can transition back and forth from the reservation when they feel it necessary and fit back into that lifestyle. These families may still retain many of the cultural norms, values, or may also take on some of the cultural attributes of the outside world. For example, the dress, language, and possible values. This group, the bicultural, you find throughout urban areas many Native American people that identify from different tribes living in urban areas. And sometimes they move off because of economic reasons of finding jobs or lack of jobs on the reservations and going into the urban areas. And transition into those areas and being able to run on time. Because that seems to be the most critical one as far as that identifier is the time. But the next one is their diets change. Soon they start buying meat from the stores, bread from the bread place, eating salad, something that's rare on the reservations. Because our diets are totally different. Soon they can't find that moose meat. They can't find those deer straps. They can't find rabbit. They can't find the fish that we eat on the reservations. And danged if our neighbors will let us cook tripe. All those change. Our diets become different. In the urban areas, our languages have to adapt because no longer can we find people among our cultural groups that speak our language and sometimes don't speak it fluently. And our children suck that culture up. Soon they're wearing clothing that are unidentifiable and don't look like where we've come from on the reservation, which is accepted as the norm. They start picking up the slang. They start losing the dialect of those people that they come from. Their children start, maybe at some point, they may even lose the language because it's not spoken in the homes, in the urban areas. And in the urban areas, they becomes what they refer to as the melting pot of cultures. Because there's not one distinct culture in one area, they start picking up the different norms from all the different tribes, the affiliated tribes, and they start emulating each other's cultures. They're still Indian. They still identify themselves as what tribe they come from. They may even know their language. They haven't given any of this up. But it does not exist in urban areas, and sometimes they lose that. But does not mean that they've given up their identity. The last group I talk about is a non-cultural Indian. Now remember, I'm never straying away from being Indian. This next group I refer to as the non-cultural Indian. The non-cultural Indian can be best described as someone who has completely taken on the dominant society cultural traits. These individuals may or may not identify as Native American. They may or may not know of their values, cultures, or their traditional language. And in a sense, sometimes their worry is if they take on that identity of that tribe, of a tribal affiliation, then they also take on the stereotype that comes along with that. They become fearful of being discriminated against, segregated. So they take on the total dominant society. And their children sometimes are never exposed to that culture. And they totally lose their cultural identity. So when I talk about these 13 traits, personal control over the environment, change is encouraged. and you control time. It's all over. It's in calendars, it's in watches, it's in our cars. It's everywhere to remind us where we should be the next second, or where we should have been that second. Time controls every sector of their lives and everything they do. Because without time, they lose wealth or identity. It plays such a huge part of their lives. They know where they're going to be tonight, because they made reservations at 4B's and they're going to be there right on time, and they were telling everybody else, we're going to be there, right? Equality of men and women. Believing that everyone should have the same right and opportunities. Individualism and privacy are things that they identify themselves with. They are no longer connected to their families. They have families in New York, they have families in Wisconsin, they have families in Arizona and New Mexico and California, and some of their families they have not seen for 5, 10, 15 years now. Remember, I have an uncle, oh yeah, that's right, he's up in Washington, haven't seen him about 20 years. I don't know if he's alive. They become so separated from their families because of their own lives that they forget that there are others, family members out there that they have forgotten about. They become individualized. Privatized. They believe in self-help. It's a big seller these days. Buy this book and this video and it'll self-help you. I wonder if they have a book out there that says it'll help you how to be a true Indian. How do you know? Because we're too reservation, we're too within our boundaries. They believe in competition and free enterprise. They are future orientated. They know where they're going to be when they retire. Sitting on the beach in Florida somewhere, drinking a martini and kicking back on a white sand. I don't know if I'm going to be back on a reservation. I know that's where I'm going to, I don't know yet, because I haven't thought that far yet. I'm still enjoying right now. I can't go beyond that, but these, the non-cultural are very much future oriented. Action and work oriented. And career identified. Informality. Now, what I talk about is not formality in the sense of work, but disregard for formality in the sense of procedures. Cultural native is taught about from children. We're taught about our role as Native American children in our communities. We're taught that there are more formalities when you go into ceremonies. Those formalities I talk about is that People that are older than me, my elders, particularly women, you never look at them in the eye. They have a lot of respect that you give them. You never look at them in the eye. When they talk to you, you don't talk to them until they talk to you. When it comes to meals, you serve them first. You don't go in front of them and jump in line and say, that steak looks good, I'm going to get it for you, Grandma. There is formality. This is when I talk about the non-cultural loses that formality. Directness and eye contact are so much important in this. Because if I look at your eye, you know I'm talking to you and you understand, and we have this thing going on in the eyes, and we're communicating openly, and we're getting across our messages. We understand each other if we see each other's eyeballs, and especially if we know what color they are, and we see right in the pupil of our eyes, we really understand what level we're on. Practicality and efficiency are very much practiced and important. Materialism, which sometimes leads to hoarding. Of keeping those possessions, those antiques in our homes cluttered and full, and our bank accounts full and overflowing, because there might be an incident that happens tomorrow. We got to make sure we're ready for that incident. That we hoard those items. All our possessions, we hoard them. We don't share them. They're kept for us. I mean, it's become such an epidemic that they even made a show out of it now. So I wonder, it does happen. Where's this going? One of the things that happened over the years here at the college, at Salish Kootenai College, is that we have been identified as a Native American Indian college. Our credentials and our degrees speak for our college. Nationwide, we are one of the top standing colleges for the academics and the professionalism that we bring out in our students. Across the nation, many of our tribes and the tribes of the 162 tribes are beginning to take notice of what we are doing. But are we really doing what we should be doing? In the Bureau of Indian Education Schools, the high school graduation for all students is 46% compared to a national average of 89%. Of those Native students who graduate high school, only 17% begin college, compared to a national average of 62%. Of the 17%, only 4% make it through the financial, emotional, and academic challenges of the first year or first quarter of their experience. Ultimately, 11% of Native people in the U.S. have a college degree, less than half the norm of the rest of the country. Indian students face a major transition from the reservation to campus life, a transition that is a major contributor why only 1 in 5 American Indian students complete their first year in college. Particularly for those Indian students who only live on a reservation or in isolated communities. Like all students, Native freshmen must adjust to campus life. The difference between high school and college classrooms and being away from their families. Yet, unlike other students, many Indian students must also adjust to a life off the reservation. This is a huge transition that encompasses culture, spiritual, nutritional, economic, and lifestyle shifts that far exceed what non-Native students face. Native students also sometimes face social pressures, and sometimes that prejudice comes from even other tribes. What are some of the solutions that we can look at as an educational institution? Is that during student orientation, if there are some student groups formed to help with the transition and establish relationships with the new incoming students, they would help the students learn their ways around the campus and introduce them to financial aid offices, the bookstore, student support services, moving to their dorms or campus housing or location for rentals in the community, where the local schools are if they have children, where the daycares are located. Doing this even before school starts and when the crowds are here, so that it lessens the pressure of feeling that they now are exposed. Give them a chance to get a feel of what campus life is going to be like. Being a new student coming from the reservation is very, very intimidating. For some of these students from the reservation areas or isolated communities, the only non-Indian they've ever run into maybe have been one of their teachers, or maybe the odd doctor. They didn't have to see them continually. Their own values, they could continue on, but here they come to major areas and they feel that loss. I've talked to students on campus here about their experience coming into campus here, and many of them have talked about that feeling that they were unwanted when they came here. That they came here and they didn't have that feeling of acceptance that they would have in their communities. That they didn't hear their language. If they want us to orientate us, how come they didn't have a drum down there doing an honor song for us coming in? We're new. I don't know. How do we greet them? Do we greet them in our native languages? Like, okay, nitaniko ninohkyayo. Hello, my name is Bear Chief. Telling you who I am here. And explaining where I come from. To the instructors, don't make assumptions. Be aware of their background and knowledge and experiences they bring to your classrooms. Get to know each of them. Trust is an integral part of that relationship you establish. One-on-one helping and tutoring at the beginning. Some may be reluctant to ask questions when I refer to the students, and some may not be as verbal as the non-native. And that may be a cultural trait. Like I said, we don't talk unless we're talked to. When teaching concepts, use examples that are relevant to their lifestyles and of their communities. Use of different modes such as visual, audio. When teaching concepts and skills, use visual aids, drawings, illustrations, or demonstrations. And do not limit activities to worksheets and lectures alone. In the beginning, have them work in small groups. Remember, these are community-oriented people. Slowly bring the small groups together into larger. This will allow students to get that feeling and more comfortable feeling, but feeling that they're part of the classroom and beginning to trust your lectures. If they do not understand the concepts, try another method, such as reteaching the concepts. Sometimes the concepts may be difficult because of vocabulary that you speak. They won't question what you say. When reteaching a concept that involves reading, have them paraphrase a paragraph that you have read it, have them read it back to you or describe to you how they have heard it. Especially for subject areas that are totally new to the individual. Use of pictures in teaching concepts that may help them understand those concepts. Some individuals may not be direct when they are asked, which could be interpreted as hinting. This may be because they do not want to appear pushy or persistent or demanding. In the Native American culture, one of the things that we're always told as Native American children is don't get the attention or draw attention, because you're going to reflect back on us. So they may be resistant to step forward in your school, in your classrooms. Be aware of their body languages, their comfort levels, and your comfort level. And we as Native American people, sometimes we are very protective of our boundaries. When others come too close to us, we are fearful of, what does that mean? When you hug a student, what does it mean? Because it's not a cultural thing. When instructors stand there and stand right in your face and talk to you, trying to get across their point, you may be offending us, but we're not going to tell you. But we'll avoid you next time. And you may wonder why. And we're not going to tell you because we don't want to offend you. Allow brainstorming and get input from everyone and ask questions in the end. So I'll bring that to you. Is there any questions or comments?
Traditional value is equality of men and women in Native societies, but you mentioned that one as a belief of the non-cultural Indian. Did I misunderstand that?
One of the things that when I talk about the cultural is that in my tribe, we are paternalistic, but one of our highest societies in my tribe is called the Mutlukiks. The Mutlukiks are a society that are a woman's society. They are the women of our tribe. This society, you don't speak to or never have eye contact with them. They have a law, the men work for them. They basically don't have to do anything. They are served because of their status. That's one illustration of that level of difference. There are many tribes where the women are not allowed any right to do anything with the ceremonies. They're excluded from those ceremonial procedures. And they're taught their role, which are very much different than a men's role. The roles are distinctive. And sometimes the women never have that allowance to do those things that the women are allowed to do in those ceremonies. So it's very much formalized. The formality is very much structured within that culture. And so when I talk about the non-cultural having that not having those formalities, I'm making reference to the cultural piece that many of the Native people are. For example, when I talk about education, when I came back here, when I very first started teaching classes here, the most difficult thing I had is I had an older gentleman by the name of Vince Perzu that was an elder, that I in my tribe would have been an elder of my people. The most difficult thing I had doing was instructing him and telling him what to do, because he should have been telling me that. And that adjustment was very hard for me. That transition was very hard. And today I still have that problem, because if I have an elderly woman that's in my class, I'm gonna have a hard time with that person. Not instructing, but getting over my own issue of my respect for what I was taught. And you're taught that from children were taught that. Does that answer that?
Not really, but we can talk later.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to take up a lot of time.
Perhaps, maybe just to tap into that, is maybe the question was equality so much as it is equality in its own form, just not seeing how mainstream sees equality. That was just my thought in the whole picture of that, what your question you're asking there.
Well, that's always the problem of using Western concepts when you're talking about indigenous cultures, and I understand that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I noticed a number of students come into school, identify themselves. They might be from Browning, they're Blackfeet, but they'll say Blackfoot. I'm noticing more and more of that, and I was wondering if maybe there's more of an identity with the Blackfoot Confederacy, or maybe more young people don't realize that they are Blackfeet instead of the Blackfoot term that you
Right. And I've run across that also, and I've tried to address that with students is, are you, and making that distinction of those tribes. That there is a distinction, even in the language of those tribes, how the dialect is spoken differently among each tribe. And so I'm trying to tell the distinction between who the Blackfeet are, where they're located, and what role they played traditionally among those tribes, what their role was. So yeah, I do run across that also.
Got an instant memory. One of the first Indian consultants to the governor was in the education department. I can't think of his name. He used to be in Hot Springs years ago. Somebody asked him at a Johnson O'Malley meeting one day, what's the difference between a Blackfoot and a Blackfeet? A Blackfoot is a one-legged Indian living in Browning.
That isn't very funny.
I haven't met him.
It's one of those poor jokes.
Any other?
You
It's not
made
appropriate to
mention
tell
of,
that joke.
of the true
It's not even
Indians
a
somewhere
joke.
along the line. So I have a huge question for you that may be unanswerable, but nevertheless will create good conversation.
Okay.
And that is, if somebody said, what is a real Indian? What would you tell them?
What's a real Indian? A real Indian, in my concept, is right here. If you're Indian, you know you're Indian in here. You don't have to wear feathers. You don't have to even speak your language. If you say I'm Indian and it's right here, you're Indian. That's what a real Indian is. That's my answer.
No, that's
Anything else?
I just want to make one comment.
But
I appreciate you sharing your perspective, but I also appreciate if I like what you had to say, but I also think it's very biased. It's like a Northern Plains bias,
Yeah.
and I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I think some of the things you said, people from other regions, tribal people from other regions would disagree with some of your comments, and treat them as overgeneralized pan-Indianism
Right.
statements.
right. And you know what? That's one thing that putting this together, I want to draw that controversy out. Why? Is that because for many years, too many years, we've pushed back that identity. And I think that what needs to happen is we need to bring that identity back.